Tell them ruin has come to their world, death, despair, and red war. Tell them their hopes and pride have come to nothing. Tell them their empty whispers fall upon deaf ears. Their gods are dead. Human logic has killed them. Tell them the angels of death have come. Tell them that nothing can save them now.
Damn, boy, he's thick! Boy, that's a thick-ass boy! Damn!
Of all the legions that turn traitor, the one I like the most from a concept point of view is the Alpha Legion. What's not to enjoy about a secretive legion of super soldiers that are several steps ahead of everyone around them? A legion whose Primarch might not even know he's the Primarch from day to day because their secrets run so deep. The problem comes when you have multiple writers who are pulling from a lore base, some of which who do not know how to fully articulate some of the most important characteristics of the Alpha Legion. This can happen with almost any character, legion, or concept, but I hate it when it happens to the Alpha Legion in particular. The difference is staggering. When the Alpha Legion is written correctly, they are so confusing, so outwardly impressive that all you can do is grin while you watch the author spin a web of lies and deceit. When the author truly gets the covert nature and clandestine maneuvers of the Alpha Legion, it's amazing to be a part of. When an author doesn't, however, well...
Is foiled again! All the cause got through!
Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, the Primarch who decimated his legion on day one of having them. The Primarch who left nothing but ruins in his wake, the like of which the World Eaters would be impressed by. The Primarch who burned paintings and destroyed statues. The Primarch whose advisors would view being spit on better treatment than what they would usually get. It's not the only character in history I've seen put in the hands of the wrong writer, nor the only one I've been worried about being put into the wrong hands. While I have no complaints about the majority of the Black Library selection, Perturabo is just one of those characters that it takes a certain kind of person to write about. A person who really understands the character. This is where I sit with the Lord of Iron, an extremely complex character who has only been properly represented a few times. One of my favorite novel series before I discovered 40k was Dragonlance, particularly about an event called the War of the Lance in the setting. There was a singular character in this series of books, without which I wouldn't have cared too much about them. His name was a play on the words Wasting Man, and he was called Rostalin. While most of the other characters in the book series were well-rounded and likable, with Tanis Halfelven being the de facto leader, Sturm the noble knight who wasn't a knight, Flint the dwarf, Rostalin's lovable brother Caramon, and the irrepressible Tasselhoff Barefoot, Rostalin was the only character in the series that was truly dark. He was physically weak, racked with illnesses. He coughed up blood often, and due to the nature of magic on his world and the test wizards had to endure to use said magic, he had golden skin, and his eyes had pupils in the shapes of hourglasses. It was his curse to see time as it affects all things. I still remember reading the first book where he made an appearance because my friend had given me the novel to read. You could literally feel the author's mood change when Rostalin was the center of attention. He was a brooding, bitter, self-centered, and hateful man. He hated his twin brother Caramon for being so likable. He displayed nothing but disdain for most people. Rostalin sacrificed everything for power. Friends, family, his health, and love. If you can name it, he let it go in the name of his own self-centered desire to be the most powerful living being on the face of the planet. I will say no more about this, because honestly, if this interests you, just email me and I will give you a reading list. So why do I bring up a fantasy novel character while I'm discussing Perturabo? Because I feel the same way about Perturabo that I feel about Rostalin. I couldn't imagine if another author had written Rostalin who didn't understand his character, his intentions, and the motivations he carried. Despite Rostalin being what he was, I saw myself in him. Out of every other character in 9 novels, he was the most human, and he was the most relatable. And the same is true of Perturabo. This is a series on mistakes the Emperor made, and Perturabo is a true case study of that bit of theory craft because while one can look at the body of work Perturabo has been portrayed in, it's a far different matter to immerse yourself into Perturabo's own mindset and realize that there is a mirror being held up to shine on us as people. How much would you be willing to endure? How much would you be willing to do? How long could you do it? What is your word worth to you? And after all those questions have been answered, what happens when enough has become enough?
The Emperor uses me for the most thankless tasks. My men are thrown against the worst of horrors, given the most grueling roles. We are divided, our talents ignored, our might reduced to splitting rock. My father ignores me, my men go unsung. Our triumphs are unremembered. My brothers mock me as my men bleed. Nobody cares.
Perturabo, after dealing with the Mommy of the Year, landed on the planet Olympia. Depending on how little your history teachers actually cared about the education you received, the parallels to ancient Greece should be obvious from the name alone. The planet was divided into various heavily fortified city-states, one of which was Lokos, and it was to this walled city that Perturabo eventually found himself bound. He was adopted by the self-styled tyrant of Lokos, and the fact that the man who adopted him called himself a tyrant should answer a few questions right out of the gate. His foster father, Damikos, spared absolutely no expense when it came to the tutoring of Perturabo. But as with all of his brothers, Perturabo seemed to have a very specific set of skills. Like Lorgar, who was exceptional at oration, and Korax, who could find a shadow on the sun.
Hello, I am here too.
Perturabo had a natural gift for understanding how things actually worked. The same way Korax could drift into a shadow and vanish even with skin so pale it was stunning, and the same way Gilliman could write a 500-page book on how to properly wipe your own ass to cover every single conceivable bathroom visit, Perturabo could understand engineering. Such was his natural affinity with engineering and craftsmanship that one of his first memories is forging a perfect sword. Granted, he had amnesia and forgot a few months of time where he might have had some practice, but still, it's impressive to say the least. Also, unlike many of his brothers, Perturabo seemed to have knowledge secreted away in his mind, knowledge that once he had the context to grasp it, it would be unlocked. Such was his knowledge that he could look at a piece of architecture, a weapon, or a design, and automatically be able to process not only knowing how something was made, but how to improve on it. He alone out of his brothers seemed to have an innate understanding of ethics, and was able to almost instantly grasp philosophical concepts. In essence, he was already ahead of his brothers in these regards, but at the same time he expressed a certain dismay at the fact that a sense of wonder had been taken away. The first time something of this nature is displayed in the lore, it insults the men who are taking Perturabo to Lokos, because they think that the walls of their city are impressive. To almost anyone else they might have looked at them in awe because of the scale of the walls. Perturabo simply told them, nothing lasts forever.
You're an get the out of here.
Perturabo's first walk in the city of Lokos also gives us greater insight into his mind and psyche. Any delight he would feel would be suddenly taken away because of the sudden burst of knowledge. There was no amazement at the grand domes and windows of the city, because before he could even express wonder at the construction, the mathematics, construction elements, and indeed everything about the materials themselves would flash into his mind. He felt jaded because of this, not knowing where this knowledge was coming from, while at the same time feeling robbed of the delight he had felt upon first seeing these things. The story of his first day in Lokos gives us tremendous amounts of insight into the Primarch that would ultimately lead the Iron Warrior Space Marine Legion. Knowledge came to him almost unwanted, philosophies and principles as well. He identified a priest without knowing about religion in the first place, and outwardly showed that he disliked that priest.
No offense, but you are a stupid asshole.
What's more, he seemed to possess a natural ability to read people, being able to tell that the tyrant of Lokos was going to use him as a weapon of war, and he could also tell that Damokos was lying, as the tyrant said that there was always time for peace. Another very interesting thing happened when Perturabo was speaking with the Tyrant of Lokos, notably when he continued to ask him if he would serve the tyrant in peace. He was convinced that the tyrant would only use him for war, and he did not like it. This shows us the true depths of the Primarch's interest. He was not someone who wanted war. Perturabo was a man who wanted peace. What's clear in the lore that actually centers around Perturabo himself is that he was a man who was mostly interested in things, not people, actually devolving people into moving parts on a wheel. In interpersonal relationships, he was much like the lion, in that both Primarchs had a distinct problem with dealing with anything that could be viewed as an insult or a stain on them. But where the lion just quietly brooded, Perturabo actually showed his displeasure, sometimes in explosive ways, whereas members of the Lion's Legion were sent back to Caliban, their homeworld, as a punishment for doing something that in some way angered or made the lion question himself. Perturabo resorted to outright belittlement, and sometimes he would deliberately set up his sons to fail spectacularly.
Fuck me! Shit! Bobby,
Yes?
I'm looking for someone to take control of this disgusting, embarrassing mess. He doesn't give a fuck. He's dreaming. He's standing there pissing his pants looking for his tartar, caviar, white chocolate crap. And he's just running around like a toilet brush. Is anyone going to take control?
While sometimes I defend the actions of the individual in question, this was simply Perturabo being a dick. Why Perturabo was like this can be explained in a lot of different ways, but the chief amongst them is the planet on which he was raised and his foster father in general. On Olympia, he was raised as the adopted son of the Tyrant of Lokos, and from the outset he was used to do nothing else but to humiliate his father's enemies. With all of his ingrained knowledge, there was little to nothing tutors could actually teach him. And just like the Emperor would eventually do, he found himself denying claims that he was divine in nature. Olympia taught Perturabo 3 things. The first was that he was superior to everyone around him, but he hated having to prove it, resenting especially warfare as a mean to force compliance in the other city-states. The second was that it's not really paranoia if they're really out to get you. The third is that considering the attrition rate of siege warfare, generals generally don't give a shit about their underlings. One of the biggest red flags for the future of the Primarch, however, is even though he despised being used as he was being used, he continued to allow himself to be used anyway. Even though he didn't want to be used as a weapon of war, he served under Damokos willingly. Even though he could have easily replaced the tyrant, he didn't. There wouldn't be many who would tell Perturabo on Olympia that he couldn't do something, because he had an amazing track record of proving them wrong. Even though all Perturabo seemed to want to do was design and build the trappings of peace, all he was actually building were the weapons of war. This went on for quite a long time, with Perturabo simply accepting his role even though at any time he could have given the Tyrant of Lokos a forehead flick, declared himself the new tyrant, and there would have been almost nothing anyone could do to stop him. Perturabo had given the tyrant his word, and he did not break it. With city after city falling to Perturabo's siege army and engines, he developed quite the list of enemies who tried to often remove the Primarch from life, in the form of assassinations and poisons. None of these worked, obviously. Also, throw in a political court that made Game of Thrones look like a church choir meeting, as well as a laundry list of men who thought they knew it all being shown to not know it all. With all of that, you have all the makings for a political bloc after another political bloc, all slanted against you. Remember what I said about paranoia. Imagine if Cersei Lannister, Joffrey, Littlefinger, all the Tyrells, and Tyrion Lannister all took heavy doses of performance-enhancing drugs and set their sights on making your life a living hell, while at the same time you were dealing with the faceless ones. Paranoia is a bitch. At any point, Perturabo could have picked up a large wooden instrument and cleaned house, and to be honest, he probably should have, but he didn't because of his promise to his foster father. A promise that the foster father was very careful not to give him a reason to break. Yet he never backed down from driving Perturabo to warfare. In fact, it was due to the endless drive of Damokos to simply wage war and flatten his enemies, and Perturabo's willingness to do it, that Perturabo gained one of his monikers, the Hammer of Olympia. I have mentioned paranoia quite a few times in this Voxcast as it relates to Perturabo, and there's also one other thing that drove this. Most people get strange vibes if they think they're being watched by other people, but Perturabo had a much different experience. Perturabo alone, out of all the Primarchs, could see what eventually he would name the Eye of Terror. A giant fuck-off maelstrom in the sky. For some reason, he always felt like it was watching him, perhaps judging him. I do not think I need to state the obvious, but I will. He despised it. Just as people will often turn hostile if they feel like they are being watched or judged, Perturabo lived his entire known existence under the watch of the Eye of Terror.
The Imperium is my father's folly. I try to believe in it because I want it to be true, just like I wanted my great buildings to be true, and the perfect societies that would use them to exist. But they cannot be. There is no such thing as perfection. Humanity is too chaotic to accept true order.
By the time the Emperor came to Olympia, Perturabo had either conquered or coerced the rest of the city-states into a union under the tyrant of Locos. Frankly, at that point he was completely fed up with Damokos after a lifetime of being used.
Shut the fuck up!
When the Emperor told Perturabo of his dream of a utopian imperium, Perturabo was completely on board, and once again it's obvious that Perturabo fully intended to help his father create this utopia. He was given command of the 4th Legion within only a year of being reunified with his father, an extremely short amount of time comparatively with the rest of the legions. The Emperor named Perturabo the Lord of Iron. The Emperor saw that Perturabo was a perfect fit for his legion, as his legion already bore the military qualities that Perturabo's cold, logical approach matched. Because of Perturabo's natural ability to understand engineering and architecture, as well as his upbringing on Olympia, he was a natural to lead a legion that specialized in siege-style warfare. Olympia's terrain and natural features had led to military doctrines of powerful fortresses and control of choke points, and Perturabo had bathed in the blood of that world.
Oh God! We're gonna die! Don't you understand? We're all gonna die!
While all the Primarchs could easily blow away any human in the term to absorb new information and knowledge, Perturabo was perhaps the most gifted of all of them. He was cold to those around him, however, particularly due to his own nature, as well as the lessons he had learned on Olympia. This left him an outsider from the start. As the Emperor usually did on worlds where he found his sons, he made Perturabo ruler of Olympia. It should come as little surprise to anyone that the Tyrant of Locos spent the rest of his life trying to recruit a rebellion against Perturabo, a decision that would ultimately come back to haunt the entire Imperium. The Emperor's first and most painful mistake was made as soon as Perturabo was named leader of the 4th Legion. After reviewing the war record of the 4th Legion compared with the other legions, Perturabo was not pleased and ordered an ancient punishment: decimation. If you're unfamiliar with what that was, please allow me to explain. Perturabo ordered around 35,000 Space Marines to assemble, and for every 10 legionaries, one would be selected by random lottery. The other 9 would then beat the one to death with their bare hands. When others heard what was happening in the Force, some of the Primarchs almost lost their shit, namely Rabute Gilliman. Some members of the Imperial Court voiced opinions that the 4th was given to Perturabo too soon. Others outright called him a madman. The 4th's war record was not lacking, far from it. The 4th had already done a great deal of work in the Great Crusade, and was already known for being a military force that could be relied on to crack any fortress. However, it was also fresh off a disaster called the Liberation of Encaledon, where 29,000 Space Marines had died, in what was considered a humiliating victory. It was perhaps this battle alone that caused the decimation. Not only did the Emperor not step in and stop Perturabo before this could occur, he actually went out of his way to silence all criticism of Perturabo. This had both good and bad after effects, as Perturabo felt fully in control of his legion and their direction, but it drastically affected the future of the 4th as a legion. To the fourth, after the decimation, failure was absolute death. There would be no favorites, no fatherly affection. War was simply an equation in which you are a number. Perturabo forged his newly acquired legion into a pure weapon of war, blooding it at the Meritera cluster where he overthrew and overcame several pocket empires for the Imperium. The fourth were named the Iron Warriors, and the legion quickly gained a reputation for brutal efficiency in siege and armored warfare, considered peerless in comparison with any other legion. It was said there wasn't a single fortress that could stand against them, and no army that they could not annihilate. But this reputation also came with a stigma that was largely based around the type of warfare that the Fourth excelled at. While other legions preferred styles of warfare that drew acclaim for glorious battles and new worlds they conquered, the Fourth's role drew none.
You have a shovel. Archetype Iron Warrior. Go take a trench, loser.
I demand to be taken seriously!
When iterators and remembrancers wished to document the Crusade, they wanted glorious stories of noble warriors, painted vistas of conquered but intact worlds, and the prized pictures and drawings of noble space marines in battle-worn but still glistening armor. The image of the Crusade was supposed to be one of hope and pride, but there is little hope to be found in the ruins of a fortress city nearly leveled, with almost all of its inhabitants slain. To the attitude of the Imperial citizenry, as well as most of the military, there was little honor in slogging through trenches in the mud. And most definitely, there was no glory to be found in losing Space Marines in numbers that any other legion would consider catastrophic in any other engagement. The Fourth bore a rate of attrition that most other legions would have been shaken to the core to even consider. This had a trickle-down series of issues that began to rear up in the forefront relatively quickly. There is a direct comparison to display here, and that comparison comes in the form of the Emperor's children and their war on the Lair. The Lair civilization was such a hardened shell that some Imperial tacticians claimed it would take at least a decade to conquer. The Primarch of the Emperor's children, Fulgrim, trying to display the superiority of his legion, declared that he would conquer the Lair within a month. This job would have ultimately fallen to Perturabo at some point, but Fulgrim took it instead. What followed was a war that tore down the spirit of the Emperor's children and placed splinters in the Legion that would eventually lead to its downfall. In the grand scheme of events, 700 of the Legion died, over 4,200 were injured, and half of that number only survived due to the skill of the apothecaries of the Emperor's children themselves. The mood of Fulgrim's inner circle was subdued, and even Fulgrim himself became far shorter in temper than normal. This war that only lasted a month against a capable civilization tore at the heart of the Emperor's children, but even as capable as the Lair were, their cities were not fortified keeps, and the warfare was largely urban in nature. Take how badly this month-long engagement hurt morale, where the warriors had the full support and trust of a legion of mortals who doted on every engagement and victory, and then contrasted it with the bleak existence of the Fourth.
Also, my life is extremely going downhill because I'm getting acne and I'm getting fat and I'm balding right here. If you can't see the whole triangle, that is like a piece of hair. I'm balding. I'm turning ugly. And my face is getting fat for the rest of the day. And I can't even shower before work because I'm not going to be at home on time.
I'm sorry. I don't remember any of it. For me, it was Tuesday.
May the Emperor bless you all. The Commissar would like to extend his personal thanks to Arcodus Vaxel for his help in not only the research for this Voxcast, but for also being the voice of a disgusting heretic. While the Commissar is getting a recap, allow me to take this time for a new segment I will call Healing with the Hospitaller, where I will go over general tips to make you a healthier cog in the wheel of our glorious Imperium. While the filthy orc uses his teeth as currency, you, my friend... Oh, hello.
Alright. Which lowest common denominator shitboot is writing this?
You see, I was trying to figure that out myself.
I understand that you Imperials don't often care for quality control, but this is just plain disappointing.
What's going on here? Oh, shit.
I shall assume it isn't you that wrote this, Commissar. or else our prior discussion would seem to have been a total waste of my time. And I don't think I need to remind you of what happens to people who waste my time.
Well, I always say time.
First of all, that you found it
interrupting me
fitting
again.
to veer off on a 4-minute tangent about a fictional character in some poxy fable is irksome to me.
Orcism?
At the very least, you could have spent less time on such a footnote, or placed it in the end of your script.
Commissar, do you know this heavily armed giant?
And I believe I made it clear in our last conversation that the arrangement to serve Damocos was specifically in exchange for his supply of knowledge. The way in which you recounted the events of that day makes the decision appear far less pragmatic than it actually was. It was a barter and a trade, not simply swearing fealty to him simply because he asked. I thought I had made this known to you, but apparently I've overestimated your capacity to pay attention.
I have to remind him of his blood pressure.
You would do well to course correct and vastly improve the writing quality of this Voxcast, or I shall personally extract all of the bones from your corpses and use them to construct a mosaic on the ceiling of my personal chambers.
Commissar, you have strange friends.
But more importantly, who in all this fetid waste of a galaxy is Archytas Vaxel? Could you, honestly, not have found someone with more gravitas to act as my voice? Am I the Lord of Iron?
The what? Alright, listen here, you fucking heretic. How dare you come into the middle of my part of the Voxcast bitching like anyone gives half a squig's ass about your opinion. You like math, Purdy Poo? How about you 1 boot plus 2 balls? What will that get you?
Who are you again?
Oh, boo-hoo. Daddy didn't look at my pretty pictures. Daddy never let me build a sandcastle on the beach. Magical idea here, Lord of Iron. Maybe instead of using valuable air to bitch, whine, and cry, how about you ask a question every once in a while?
Excuse you?
Did that thought ever cross half the wires in your damned head? You have enough of them. Maybe you should strap on some jumper cables and use them to boot up Brain 1 in your fucking skull.
Okay.
It's a damn shock to me that you can do spatial calculations in your head, but you can't figure out why your entire damn legion was looked at like what went into a test tube should have gone into a tissue and flushed down the toilet.
Listen.
No, shut the fuck up, I'm talking now.
Wow.
Oh, we have to dig trenches and our army units call us corp grinders. Oh, boo-hoo. Maybe sending thousands to die so you could find a ratling with a mortar and a pillbox on a hill might have something to do with that.
If you could just
Master Strategist my ass.
get a word in.
No, you can't get a word in.
Wow.
That's your damned problem and the entire problem with your legion and you. You felt shit on? Well, instead of running to your room and playing with your toys, maybe recommend a corpse change. Did you ever think of that, you big bald bastard? Or does the guy who spends hours doodling a bathhouse with measurements down to the picometer have really that much trouble drawing a conclusion? But no, you're just one giant jackass know-it-all. First day on the job, you get all pissy and have 1 out of every 10 men kill each other, and now your men all think you saved them from being needlessly sacrificed in the service of the Emperor? The apple doesn't fall far from the dumbass tree, now does it?
Sister Everly, please don't fry my guests.
Let's not forget that you jumped ship and sided with fucking Horus, even though the shithead was the one giving you the insane orders that you followed. He sideways slam-fucked your legion to the point where you all went from a bunch of bitter, genocidal, repressed assholes into dead, bitter, genocidal, repressed assholes.
Sure, she has to come up for air at some point.
And then, instead of telling him to fuck off after he
Sister
drove you
Adelaide, your blood
batshit
pressure.
insane, you go off and lick his asshole because he forgave you? What the fuck? And then you get all mad because Daddy had you build a council room on Ikea? Poor Perturabo, the great Lord of Iron, the terrifying hammer of Olympia, doesn't dare say he wants to build other things.
Sister Everly.
He just stands there with his face all screwed up like some brat who can't get rat dust on their rations. Erda was a stupid bitch, but I can understand why she bounced past your ass into the warp rift. I can only imagine the shame of your Marines when they had to introduce you to people. Sanguinia, so charming. Gilliman, so noble. Perturabo, so fucking what?
What?
Get that shocked look off your thrice-damned face, you insufferable bastard. Okay, that's it. Where's my flamer? It's time for me to
Sister
make some
Emily,
bitch
your
kebab.
blood pressure.
You fucking...
Okay, I'm done here. Foldrim might enjoy being screamed at by a rabid weasel, but I do not. I regret ever having been involved in this, and I hope this project of yours fails. I'm leaving now, as I have more amphitheatres to build on Medringard. Not that any of you Philistines would know what an amphitheatre is, but nonetheless. Screw this, screw you, and screw that corpse of an emperor, you absolute waste of space. Iron within, shitboots, and iron without.
The morale of the Fourth took blow after blow, not only because of the deepening resentment of their Primarch, but from the sheer brutality and thanklessness of the missions they were given. To the Iron Warriors and Perturabo, war was a brutally mathematical formula. Relationships between legionnaires were strained, and not many were close. Because in a legion with such a high casualty turnover rate, one can only expect to be alive for so long. The Iron Warriors distanced themselves from the other legions just as other legions distanced themselves from the Iron Warriors. Such was the rate of casualties in the Iron Warriors and their army units. Other legions and army units began labeling the Iron Warriors the Corpse Grinders, and the name of the Fourth was taken out of the legion records for a few of the legions who only called the Fourth Comrades in Arms. Eventually, the Fourth themselves began to look down on what they saw as a lack of discipline, pure vanity, and pure weakness in their brother legions. The Fourth suffered horribly, not as a result of the Primarch that led them, or the tactics that they employed, but from the pure and unadulterated brutality and reality of siege warfare. Multiple incidents began to happen within the Fourth, where after the Fourth would breach the final stronghold of a holdout, they would simply massacre the remaining defenders. The morale of the army units attached to the Fourth were eventually replaced with what in the 41st millennium would charitably be called penal legions. Typecast completely into cracking the absolute hardest shells and being placed on garrison duty became the norm for the Fourth, with the garrisoning units often being placed on hostile worlds and at times ridiculously outnumbered. In short, being in the Fourth was perhaps the worst fate to have as a Space Marine in the Great Crusade. You were guaranteed to be shoved directly into the most hostile of meat grinders, and if you weren't killed, you were either off to yet another meat grinder or placed into a hostile garrison. In one such case, a single tactical squad was left on a world of 130 million people. There would be no paintings of you, no noble stories to tell. You were either going to die face down in the mud, be physically shattered until you were more machine than Space Marine, or left on a planet that despised you. And while all of that was going on, you were going to be judged by legions who had never once fought the sort of battles that you had to fight. And while they were celebrated and lauded, there was nothing for you to do but the most basic cleaning of your armor before preparing to meet the next horror that the Great Crusade had to throw at you head on. This is the direct fault of the Emperor himself, but it falls directly in line with how the Emperor viewed not only the legions but his sons as well. The Fourth was a jackhammer meant to pound apart even the hardest target, and it was doing its job. But even a jackhammer eventually needs to be taken for maintenance. The Fourth had very little downtime, being bled constantly in some of the worst war zones imaginable. And while I do think that every legion in the end was a tool to the Emperor, the Fourth was the one that was treated most as one. While the Emperor was granting the Emperor's children the right to bear the Imperial Aquila on their breastplates, the Fourth was dying. While the Emperor heaped praise on the Lunar Wolves, the Fourth was dying. While the Emperor spent months celebrating the rediscovery of Lorgar, the Fourth was dying. If there was a single legion in the entire Great Crusade that not only needed, but flat out deserved recognition and praise for their actions, it was the Fourth. But that never once happened. If anything, the Fourth Legion was mistreated and neglected by the Imperium's leadership and the Emperor himself, and this attitude persisted. Then there is the matter of Perturabo himself. About the Primarch, I can only say one thing. Imagine that you are in a job that you are the absolute best at, but it is a job that you loathe. You are bound by contract to do this job and you can't leave it. And because of your work ethic, you stay at it. Your coworkers are celebrated for doing tasks half as hard as yours, while your own hard work is looked down on as beneath contempt even to those same coworkers who wouldn't dare put themselves in the same position. Now imagine doing this job while others in your company are allowed to do what you love, a job that you would be better at doing than they are. Then imagine this goes on for over a century and a half. If you say you wouldn't be bitter to the point of curdling milk by staring at it, you are lying to yourself. Perturabo held onto his word past the breaking point. To him, his word meant everything. It's why he didn't kill Damokos and take over Olympia. It's what kept him in the Imperium for as long as he was. Perturabo never argued orders. He simply did as he was ordered to do. Other Primarchs would flatly refuse to have their troops stand in garrison duty, not Perturabo. Perturabo gave his word he would see the Great Crusade through, that he would achieve the goals of the Emperor and create the utopian ideal that was the Imperium. I will not even get into the rivalry between Rogel Dorn and Perturabo because quite frankly that would be another 30-minute lore video all on its own, but it was severe. The two both favored siegecraft but had vastly differing means of approaching it. Of the two Primarchs, Rogel Dorn wouldn't accept the same casualties that Perturabo would unless it was necessary in the extreme. Perturabo was pragmatic in his approach to war, while Rogel the polar opposite, and this eventually led to an enmity between the two that would last well past the Horus Heresy. Perturabo and the Fourth were made of the hardest cast iron, but in the end, cast iron does not bend, it breaks. Perturabo's disposition right before the beginning of the Horus Heresy was nothing more than pure resentment. Libraries full of civil designs sat unused, books of engineering genius sat collecting dust, all the while the blood of the Fourth flowed in rivers that only got larger. Then, finally, during the middle of a war that even by the standards of the Iron Warriors was brutal, Perturabo was given word that his former home of Olympia had raised their flag in rebellion. For the first time in his life, Perturabo broke from orders. The Iron Warriors returned to Olympia, and only when the fires were lit to burn the stacks of bodies of the dead did Perturabo come to his senses. While the Iron Warriors had put citadels to the sword, they hadn't turned their bitterness and resentment onto the civilian population. On Olympia, Perturabo had allowed entire cities to be put to the sword, and Perturabo knew that he had done something unforgivable in the eyes of the Emperor. We don't truly know if the Emperor would have forgiven Perturabo or not, but in Perturabo's eyes, the Emperor would never forgive the genocide of a planet. What is known is that Perturabo's guilt proved the final nick in the iron will of the Primarch. When Horus learned of the genocide on Olympia, he gave Perturabo something the Emperor hadn't. Praise. Praise and forgiveness. Although it would take a long time for him to cope with what he had done, Perturabo was now committed to Horus, and all that Horus had to do to gain the loyalty of Perturabo was to forgive him. For over 150 years, the Iron Warriors and Perturabo had been on the receiving end of the most horrific wars the Imperium had seen. In the end, it was their iron will that proved to be their downfall, because their commitment to following orders came from the same iron will as their father. Perturabo endured, not because he was being forced to, but because he had given the Emperor his word that he would do as ordered. Perturabo had given his father his word that he would be the Emperor's Lord of Iron, even if he died in the process. While Angron's story is tragic because of what the Emperor did, Perturabo's story comes down to what the Emperor didn't do. I have stated several times the Emperor treated his sons as tools, and that and a combination of impatience, hubris, and the complete lack of understanding of the desires of his sons led to many of the great mistakes of the Master of Mankind. In no other Legion story does this become more painfully apparent. Perturabo's direct methods of warfare made his Legion the go-to option to handle the hardest targets, and with the galaxy-wide expansion there was more than enough hard targets. This led to a situation where there was little downtime, and little chance for rest for a Legion and a Primarch that needed it more than any other. The Fourth was the Emperor's blunt instrument, and if you go into any tool shop there is almost always a dirty sledge that sits in a corner. Meanwhile, many of the other Legions were celebrated, placed front and center to be admired. Not the Fourth, and not its Primarch. The saddest thing is that the fate of the fourth was so easily avoidable if the Emperor actually understood how his son saw the world and had taken time to perceive the world from his son's eyes. How different would the fourth's attitude have been after they waged a horrific war to take a world they were given a few months' downtime to leave something behind besides a wall of corpses and smoking ruins? How different would Perturabo's outlook have been if he would have been allowed to do this, actually practicing the art he truly desired after the hated art of war? This was common amongst other legions, with only a few approaching the relentless pure grind of warfare that the fourth endured. Perhaps the greatest insult to the Primarch himself was when his arch-rival, Rogel Dorn, and his Imperial fists were ordered back to Terra to garrison the Imperial Palace and fortify the capital of the Imperium.
Who do you think you are, you snot-faced little punk? Let me make this clear for you, okay? And now try to follow me, because I'm going to be moving in a kind of circular motion. So if you pay attention, there will be a point. You are nothing. If you were in my toilet bowl, I wouldn't bother flushing it. My bath mat means more to me than you.
While the Emperor's reasons for assigning this duty to Rogel are clear, it was a reward that Perturabo clearly felt like he deserved far more. In the end, the Iron Warriors and their Primarch did not bend to the will of Chaos or Horus, nor did they bend at all. They broke. They broke under the endless string of casualties and bitter wars. They broke under the constant strain of a thankless and hated task that bore no glory. They broke because they were overused and worn so thin when the final grain of sand struck the iron it simply snapped. Perturabo is often mocked for being a petulant man-child, but in my eyes he's the most human of any of the Primarchs. In truth, he is more like all of us to enjoy this lore and the game that it comes from. After all, every bit of this theory crafting and lore comes from a war game, the likes of which the Perturabo's own men played almost any time they were not engaged in actual warfare and had some downtime. When a player makes an army in 40k, there is no room for individual heroism, just as Perturabo planned his forces. We reduce a battlefield down to units with precise statistics, just as Perturabo. We pragmatically sacrifice to draw others into our plans, just as Perturabo. And just like Perturabo, the Primarch of the 4th Legion who built a scaled-down working model of a Warhound Titan with screws the size of a grain of sand. Oh my god, I fucking want one! We are obsessed with creation. Every time we play a game of 40k, we play it as Perturabo's Iron Warriors would play it, with no mind to casualties, only victory. So, after all of that, what was the single greatest mistake the Emperor made with Perturabo? To me, that is a simple thing. After all the countless sieges and seemingly endless struggle that the Iron Warriors put themselves through for the Emperor's utopian ideal, the Emperor never once looked at them and said 2 words. Thank you.
No! It cannot be! You! Is it true? Tell me it is not true! What you did, what is coming!